Okay, so I'm reading Unsettled. Oh, Konner, I believe it is. Melvin Konner, Konner, The Anthropology of the Jews. I'm not starting from the beginning. I'm going to start somewhere in the center. Still others go to the heart of the Jewish ethics and philosophy. Ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? He who learns from everyone. Who is strong? He who controls his will. Who is rich? He who is satisfied with his portion. Who is honored? He who honors the community." There is debate about Torah passages, but about special practical situations, and these reflect life in Israel while the rabbis of the Mishnah lived, much of it in case law. It reflects Jewish life because its purpose was to govern Jewish life, and this exchange between life and text has gone on ever since. Just the titles of the tracks convey an enormous richness of information about people's lives. The first order's tractates are seeds, blessings, corners of the field, doubtful tithes, mixtures, sabbatical years, contributions to the priests, tithes for the Levites, other tithes, uncircumcised fruit, and first fruits. The second order deals with festivals, the Shabbat, boundaries, Passover, shekels, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Booths, prohibitions on festivals, New Year's, fast days, scrolls, minor festivals, and festival offerings. The third order covers women, sister-in-law, marriage, contracts, vows, Nazarites, adulterous women, divorce, and betrothals. The fourth handles damage, Sanhedrin, how to judge crime and sign punishment, lashes, oaths, testimonies, idolatry, ethics of fathers, and rulings. In the fifth order are holy things, animal sacrifices, offerings, kosher slaughter firstlings, valuations of temple vows, sacral substitutions, sin and guilt offerings, sacrilege, daily sacrifice, temple dimensions, and sacrificial birds. And in the sixth and last, devoted to purity and pollution, are purity vessels and utensils, tents with corpses, leprosy, the red heifer, purification, ritual baths, the menstruating woman, food impurities, sexual secretions, daytime immersion, hand washing, and impurities of plants and fruit. Finally, there are additional small sections on ethics, scribes, happy occasions, brides, courtesy, peace, converts, Samaritans, slaves, Torah scrolls, tefillin, ritual fringes, and the mezuzah. Every day people needed to know how to live, moment to moment, now how to dress, plant, harvest, marry, worship, settle fights, expunge pollution, eat, drink, sacrifice, divorce, atone, celebrate, tithe, and bless. And of course they had to do all this within the framework of the Torah. They could read the Torah and they could hear interpretations of it, but to follow it faithfully, as they dearly wished to do, they had to understand not just every word, but every jot and tittle, every hidden or convoluted or even mystical meanings. For that they had to ask those who spent their lives in substance studying the Torah from childhood. These men were not authorities, but descent. Although descent from learned men did matter, but because they had risen through the ranks of Torah learning, they meant decades of intellectual rigor, study, fiercely competitive debate. 1,000, it is said, can read the Torah, 100 read the Mishnah, 10 devote themselves to study, and only 1 becomes a teacher. But it was vital to be in the process somewhere, and somewhere you were in it, you would honor the Torah, and in return, it would honor you. Apart from guiding religious observance, the rabbi's role in resolving small claims was vital to the Mishnah, and the results reflect daily life. If he gave to a joiner a box, chest, or cupboard, or repair, and the latter spoiled it, he is liable to pay compensation. On the other hand, the potter who brought his pots into the courtyard of a householder without permission, and the breast of the householder broke them, the householder is exempt. An ox in a courtyard may be gored by the householder's ox or bitten by his dog, or may fall into well and polluted the householder's water, but liability depends on the prior agreement between the two. Debates cover ownership of houses, cisterns, trenches, caves, dovecotes, bathhouses, olive presses, irrigating fields, and slaves. Other rulings deal with ovens, stoves, millstones, manure put in a courtyard, chickens brought into a house, gutters, spouts, and windows of different sizes, mistakes in dyeing wood, disputes with storekeepers, fraud and interest on loans, or all grist for the Mishnah's mill. So are deputies over grain stacked on a threshing floor, a basket of grapes, a vat of olives, and balls of potter's clay. We are on page 94. The Mishnah assumes a world of male-headed families living in houses and villages. A divorced woman returned to her father's house, but grave problems arise at moments when a woman moves from one man to another. A woman whose husband went overseas and they came and told, "Your husband has died," and who remarried and whose husband afterward returns, she requires a right of divorce from that one. But he whose wife went overseas and whom they came and told, "Your wife has died," and who marries her sister and whose wife thereafter came back, she is permitted to come back to him. Despite this and other evidence of gender inequality, at least one woman, Barura, was a brilliant Torah scholar. These opinions came from various courts. The Great Sanhedrin, the highest, consisted of 71 rabbis who ruled on matters of state and appointed judges to lower courts. Important Jewish centers each had a small Sanhedrin of 23 judges to mete out criminal punishment. The death penalty was rare. A court that executed someone once in 70 years was called murderous. Small courts of these rabbis dealt with torts and contracts, and below those were 3 members arbitrated boards, laymen chosen by the debutants. Each picked one, and these 2 chose a third, but most governance was left to rabbis. They held the Sanhedrin was called Nasi, prince or governor. Local authorities included synagogue heads and other community leaders. The role of Sanhedrin's leadership reached its peak in Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the prince, whose wealth and charisma combined with his genius to yield an unequally strong leader. Judah was a correspondent and a way of a colleague of 2 Roman emperors and won their respect for Judaism. He avoided conflict with Rome, focusing his energy on Torah study, but also fostered settlement of Israel by Jews and organized the Jewish world, not just in Israel, but in the diaspora. He emphasized Hebrew, insisted that it's not Aramaic, should be spoken the language of daily life and the only language of prayer, but ever the pragmatist, he was tolerant of Greek. He had the will to live like a prince and did, yet was famous for humility, and he used his wealth to support poor scholars as well as community projects. Nevertheless, he was contemptuous of the ignorant. Trouble comes to the world, he said, only on account of the unlearned. His distaste for Aramaic and the language of people who inherently elitist, he exempted scholars from taxes, increased the burden on artisans and farmers, but reverted himself when some rabbis refused to benefit in the way from their knowledge of the Torah. He is best known for finalizing the Mishnah, the basis of his future Jewish life. He did the eclectically ensuring wide rabbinical support. By the time of his death, he was often referred to simply as Rabbi, and the one colleague remarked that not since the days of Moses were learning and high office combined in one person until Rabbi. He not only completed the Mishnah, but prepared the text stage of the law, training the best young minds to interpret the Mishnah. And as the last of the Tananim, students or scholars, they were the first of the Amorim, speakers or explainers. As he finished the Mishnah, they began the rest of the Talmud, the Gemara, and large body of commentary and debate about Mishnah. The rabbis of the Mishnah argued about the Torah, and the rabbis of the Gemara argued about the Mishnah. Israel itself continued to produce great rabbis, but there was a new center of learning in the Jewish world, and it was, of all places, Babylon. The place of the first exile, 7 centuries earlier, became in the end the most important diaspora. Recall that thousands of Jews trickled back to Israel in the century after they'd gone into exile. They rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem and stood up and sang when Ezra lifted the scroll of the law. But, finishing page 95, some Jews never left, and prospering in Babylon under the Persians and other powers, they slowly built a new life of Jewish life. This life was tied to Jerusalem, but was outside with Roman political sphere. It was filled with yearning for the Holy Land, but free of the tragic politics and the messianic dreams. It took its calendar from Israel, but set its own scholarly agenda. That agenda would now take the lead. Josephus said to the Jews of Babylonia, comprised countless myriad of which none can know the number. Anyway, it was Lot. There were large Babylonian cities populated, maintained, and garrisoned by Jews. They were conscious of their heritage both in Israel and in Babylon, and they were also self-conscious about their purity, resisting intermarriage, yet proselytizing in new ways. Indeed, the Talmud compares Babylon Jewry to pure sifted flour, even more so than Jews who remained in Israel. They kept close ties to those Jews deferring to the Sanhedrin in certain matters of judgment. Some leading rabbis in Israel, such as Hillel, were born in Babylonia, while some leading Babylonian sages went up to Israel to die and be buried. Great rabbis in each drew students from the other. But even in Judah's time, the Jewish Babylon was rapidly in ascendance. His counterpart in Babylon, called the Exilarch in Greek, was at the time a rabbi of such distinction that Judah supposedly offered to step down as head of the Sanhedrin should he be willing to come to Israel. The Exilarch was also by tradition a descendant of King David. Adding to his prestige, he had a prominent position among the lords of the Parthian Empire, and their relatively relaxed feudal system enabled him to secure right and privilege for the Jews. Most Babylonian Jews were farmers, as they had been during the exile 7 centuries earlier. Some were substantial landholders, but most were peasants and tenant farmers, and among the means of livelihood were cultivated by Babylon's famed date palm, growing other fruit trees, poultry, farming, and fishing. But many Jews were artisans, merchants, and traders. They were carpenters, blacksmiths, potters, tailors, cobblers, weavers, tanners, builders, goldsmiths, silversmiths, architects, surveyors, doctors, and bloodletters. There was, of course, religious craft, like making mezuzahs, tefillin, and ritual fringes. And down the social scale were hunters, fishermen, donkeys, divers, camel drivers, and sailors. Most teachers were also scribes. Their talents might be used for official secular documents. A few people worked in the Jewish courts and the synagogue, synagogues. And of course, Mesopotamia was a crossroad of world trade, as it had been for the millennia. The Silk Route from China went through it, and did India spices, fruit, as did Indian spices, fruit, and iron. Jewish participation was natural. As a tolerated peripheral people, Jews found trading a logical path to success, but far more were petty merchants peddling spices, grocers selling flour, oil, and wine, butchers, ritual slaughterers, and bakers. Some were money changers, but the only important property was land. The Jews paid heavy taxes, and if they could not pay, they might lose their deeds and might become tenants on their own land. Nevertheless, they followed the dictum of one of their leading rabbis, and it would stand for centuries. The laws of the kingdom are laws. When they doomed Bar Kokhba revolt on the savage repression that followed drove many scholars out of Judea. Most joined the community that had stayed in Babylon during the centuries after the exile. Together, they established at least two great academies. The one at Sura on the Euphrates east bank had 1,200 regular students and thousands more who joined for a month in summer and winter during lulls in farming. The one at Perpentida had a rockier course and was sacked and rebuilt in the 3rd century, eventually moving to the west bank of the Tigris. The endurance of the tradition was remarkable. Both the academies would see the 10th century. It was here, in an exile turned diaspora, that the Babylonian Talmud was written during the 4 centuries after the Mishnah was completed. There was a parallel process in Israel, and rivulets joined the two streams, the Jerusalem Talmud, as it was called. Also, it was made elsewhere in Israel, came to completion first. But the race was not to the swift, and the Babylonian Talmud, more graceful, more detailed, more richly intellectual, and more respectful of argument, became the main permanent source of Jewish law. It was not a small matter, since they differed in both substance and style. The Jerusalem Talmud was in Hebrew, with some passages in Aramaic, and many Greek borrowings. The Babylonian was mainly in Eastern Aramaic, with only a few Persian words. The Jerusalem Talmud is in spare its discourse, more like an outline of legal conclusions, while the Babylonian is discursive and legalistic, yet somewhere more inviting. The Babylonian Talmud spread much more rapidly in the diaspora. In Israel, Jews' community declined, while Babylon grew stronger. Its rabbis carried their Talmud throughout the world and finally took it to Israel as well. Perhaps because the Babylonian Talmud was created in exile, the vast majority of the Jews were in exile. But for whatever reason, the Babylonian Talmud became the Talmud. So what is the Talmud? At its core, literally in the center of each page, are the texts of the Mishnah and the Gemara, the debates of the rulings from the two great rabbinical eras. As the Mishnah debates the Torah, the Gemara debates the Mishnah. Around the core are later commentaries, notably that of Rashi, a great French 11th century rabbi. It is no exaggeration to say that the text saved the Jews. When the Second Temple crumbled, ancient Judaism ended. There would be no more sacrifices, priests, tithes, offering, or rituals of purification, except of remembered abstractions. Today, Torah Judaism was not born in the Talmudic age. It was conceived by Josiah and Holudah and born with Ezra as midwife. After the first exile, it grew to youthful vigor in the Second Temple Israel, and in the century after Temple fell. But it came of age as the Talmud was set down, mainly in Babylonia. There, Judaism took something like its present form, and from there it is won over the Jewish world. The ancient synagogues of Alexandria, Delos, and Rome, and already centuries old, when they had encountered Talmud Judaism, but also come to its spell. It was coherent, smart, and meaningful, and won the hearts and minds of Jews in every land. Its sages were revered forever after. A recent Orthodox account says each word of our holy sages was pronounced while the Ruach HaKadosh, divine spirit, rested upon them. It continues. Hillel had 80 disciples. 30 of them were worthy of having the divine presence rest upon them, as it did upon Moses, our teacher. 30 deserved the sun orbits should be halted for them, as it was for Joshua. 20 were average. After the least great Rabbi Yekonena ben Zekiah, and it was said that there was no verse of scripture or of the Talmud he did not know. About the greatest Unsettled ben Uziel, it was said that while he was studying Torah, the angels would gather around him to listen. And as a result, the spiritual fire emanated from them. Any bird that flew over the Unsettled ben Uziel, headed while he was studying world, would be synced. These rabbis live in the cultural memory of Orthodox Jews in a place beyond space and time. The rulings they made were as good as if spoken by God. In fact, they were better. The story is told of Rabbi Eliezer, who in a certain argument did not win over his colleagues, but sure was he of his rightness that he called upon the supernatural aid. He said to them, "If the law is in accord with me, let the carob tree prove it." The carob tree was uprooted and moved 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. They said to him, "We don't bring proof from a carob tree." He then said to them, "If the law agrees with me, let the channel of water prove it." The channel of water turned and flowed the other way. They said to him, "We don't bring proof from a channel of water." Then he said to them, "If the law agrees with me, let the walls of the study house prove it." The walls of the study house began to fall. Rabbi Joshua said to them, "If scholars are debating each other about the law, do you know about it? What do you know about it?" They did not fall down in honor of Rabbi Joshua, but they did not straighten up in honor of Rabbi Eliezer, and they are still standing and learning. Then he said to them, "If the law agrees with me, let the proof come from heaven." A voice came forth and said, "Why do you argue with Rabbi Eliezer? The law also agrees with him." Rabbi Joshua rose to his feet and said, "It is not in heaven." Deuteronomy 30:12. Here the Gemara commentary intervenes in the Mishnah text. What is the meaning of "it is not in heaven"? Rabbi Jeremiah said, "Since the Torah was already given on Mount Sinai, we don't pay attention to voices, for you already wrote in the Torah on Mount Sinai, following the majority." Exodus 23:2. The Mishnah resumes. Rabbi Nathan met Elijah and the prophet and said to him, "What did the Holy One, blessed be he, did at that moment?" Elijah told him. He smiled and said, "My sons have defeated me, and my sons have defeated me. My sons have defeated me, and my sons have defeated me." Surpassed may be a better translation, but either way the passage is in threefold. First, it was fine to argue with God as Abraham, Jacob, and Moses did. God expected. Second, the law and process, not fact. It emerges at the living edge of experience. Third, the Torah was given to humanity at Sinai. After that, furthermore, belongs to human beings. It contains within itself all we need, provided we understand it, and our minds are granted the power to do just that. The Torah itself says, "It is not in heaven." And after the majority, God's word enters the mouths of the sages, and when they vote, that is the law. But debate was just the beginning of enlightenment. The goal of the exercise was to do the right thing by man and God. How does a man find his Father who is in heaven? He finds him by good deeds and study of Torah. And the Holy One, blessed be He, finds man. Page 99, Dysphoria, from the book Unsettled, by Melvin Konner, Konner. Through love, through brotherhood, through respect, through companionship, through truth, through peace, through bending the knee, through humility, through studious sessions, through commerce lessened, through the service of the masters, through the discussion of the students, through a good heart, through decency, through no, through not that is really no, through yes, that is really yes. These are the acts that emerge from a life in and of Torah. The passage also implies that God searches for human beings just as they search for God. Recall the passage from Proverbs and in the Sabbath morning service. It is a tree of life to those who lay a hold of it, and all who uphold it are happy. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all of its paths are peace. These claims might attend anyone who knows Jewish history, which seems a trail of tears. Yet a real history is not that of wars and kings and slaughter and exile, but that of the moment-to-moment lives of ordinary people. From them, the Talmud message could not be more clear. Every place where Israel was exiled, the divine presence was with them. They were exiled to Egypt, the presence was with them. They were exiled to Babylon, the presence was with them. They were exiled to Rome, the presence was with them. And when they returned, the presence was with them. The presence is everywhere. Its earthly form is in the Torah, and the Talmud is nothing less than the Torah reached into human life. Part of the reaching, and through philosophy the sages elicit claims about how we should live, the wisdom of 10 generations, and draws down into our one tractate, saying of the fathers, the advice of each distilled in a few words. It has been called a Talmudic book of Proverbs. The first is that the tribute to Moses, Joshua, and the elders who said 3 things: be careful in judgment, raise many disciples, and build a fence around the Torah. The fence in the oral law, the Torah commanded, thou shalt not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. Repeat 3 times, leads to a complete separation of milk and meat, including separate sets of dishes, or hours elapsed between eating them, and ritual reverse of cross-contamination. These are many other sayings. Joshua ben Perara says, provide yourself with a teacher, get you a comrade, and judge everyone with the scale weighted in his favor. I'm going to finish. Thank you for joining, and blessings.